In today's episode, we're going to discuss the case of Christopher Foster and the horrific murders he committed. From the outside, Christopher Foster was living the dream. He had a beautiful family, a lavish home, nice cars, and money out the wazoo. What most people didn't know was that Chris was actually in millions of pounds of debt. On the morning of August 26, 2008, a crazy house fire was reported in Maesbrook, Shropshire, which is a town in England. It was the huge, fancy home of the Foster family. When police officers and firefighters arrived at the home, they weren't able to get to the house. There was a horse trailer blocking the gate, and it appeared that all of the tires had been deflated by bullets. It took them 3 days to put the fire out completely, and what they found on the property was absolutely horrendous. While taking photos of the crime scene, one of the officers stepped by something described as spongy. Turns out that spongy thing he stepped on was a pair of corpses. The officer stated they were revealed to have fallen through the burned floor from above while still entwined. The corpses belonged to 50-year-old Christopher and his 49-year-old wife, Jill. And not long after that, Christopher and Jill's 15-year-old daughter, Christy Foster, was also discovered inside the home. And all of the dogs, horses, ducks, and chickens were lifeless too, but not from the fire. They had been taken out with a firearm. It ended up taking 7 days for all of the bodies to be removed from the scene. Autopsies were performed on all 3 family members, and the examiner concluded that Jill and Christy were executed in their sleep by Chris. Chris's COD was recorded as smoke inhalation, but he was found next to a loaded rifle, so some people believe he may have pointed it at himself and pulled the trigger. In reality, Chris was in a lot of financial trouble, and his business had gone down the toilet. Chris started out selling pizza in the 80s, but it wasn't long until he was a major player in the oil business. After the Piper Alpha oil platform explosion in 1987, which killed 167 men, Christopher pulled through with a grand idea for an oil rig sealant called UlvaShield. Chris patented UlvaShield, and due to its 5-star safety rating, this product was in high demand. Chris's fortune skyrocketed, and before he knew it, he was a millionaire. Chris started dressing all nice and bought a £1 million home Jill saw in a magazine. Chris claimed to have paid for the house in cash, but people later discovered it had been mortgaged multiple times. Something to know about Chris is he loved clay pigeon shooting, and he was obsessed with firearms. He often misused the weapons in extremely concerning ways. Chris would fire at Jill's doves if they ever got in the garage because he didn't want them pooping on his cars, and he also offed Christie's Labrador Retriever with a rifle because it was chasing sheep. By 2005, Chris was reported to have acquired 2.8 million pounds of debt, but he didn't want to change his rich lifestyle. Instead, Chris decided to charge up his credit cards and change suppliers for UlvaShield to save some coin for his company. In doing so, he breached the contract he had with the old supplier, who took him to court and won. Because of this, Chris's company was liquidated in 2007. He also hadn't been paying his taxes and owed over £800,000 to the government. At least 20 of his bank accounts were overdrawn, and he had apparently been cheating on his wife too. Reports say he had somewhere around 8 mistresses. Chris apparently confessed to an employee that he was having suicidal thoughts. Because of that, he was prescribed antidepressants. At one point, Chris told a longtime friend named Mark about his financial situation. Chris said he didn't want to put this on Jill and Christy because he didn't think they'd be able to cope with it. Then Chris asked Mark to look after his wife and daughter because he was going to take his own life. Chris told Mark he was going to do the deed out in the woods with his shotgun, but somewhere along the way, that plan changed, I guess. What most people believe spurred Chris to pop off that August day was this. The family housekeeper found a letter on the outside gate. It was from bailiffs who announced plans to repossess all of Chris's belongings in the coming days. The housekeeper mentioned seeing Chris read the letter. She said he was silent, but looked absolutely distressed. On August 25th, 2008, the Fosters were invited to a barbecue and clay pigeon shoot. During their gathering, Chris was bragging about his 11 million pound deal he was about to secure, which was a lie, of course. The Fosters rode home in Jill's Range Rover, and it wasn't long before Jill went to bed. At 11:30 p.m., Chris told Christy to go to sleep. She apparently went back to her room and was chatting with a friend on the internet, so Chris then turned their internet off. But after that, we know quite a few details because the Fosters' home security cameras were recording and the footage was all recovered. At 3:10, Chris was seen by the horse stable holding a .22 with a silencer and a light attached to it. Armed and ready, Chris started walking towards the house. There wasn't any footage from inside the home, but from what investigators gathered, this is when Chris went into his and Jill's bedroom and fired at his wife in the back of the head. Jill was believed to have been asleep when it happened. After that, Chris went across the hall to Christy's room and did the same thing to her in the same exact place. In addition, Chris iced all of the animals on the property in the same fashion, with a bullet to the head. After that, he poured about 200 gallons of oil around the house and set it ablaze. Anyway, after the horrific mass execution, Chris drove the horse trailer in front of the gate and parked it there to block, or at least delay, first responders from entering the property. Chris took out the keys, shot out all of the tires, and ran back inside the home. When neighbors heard a loud sound, which was later revealed as Chris's cars exploding in the garage, they called 999, which is the emergency number in England. A lot of people described Chris as narcissistic and controlling. So with the downfall of his company and finances, a lot of people believe he committed this crime out of fear of failure and embarrassment. He didn't want people to know about his debt. As for Jill and Christy, a lot of commenters on the case believe he iced them because he didn't want them to find out either. Rumor has it, both Chris and Jill were cheating on one another. One person claimed they had an open marriage. So this could also be another reason Chris took out Jill. He didn't want her to be happy with another man, or more like, he didn't want other people in town seeing Jill happy with another man. When details of the crime spread, the whole town was devastated. People left cards and flowers to honor the deceased. But Chris was looked down upon by most. Chris's brother Andrew was shocked but not surprised. When they were children, Chris sexually assaulted Andrew, so they didn't keep in touch as adults. Andrew was heartbroken to hear about his brother's actions and said he wished his doctor had notified the police of Chris's suicidal thoughts, given the fact that he owned so many firearms. Andrew said, "We wish to highlight that preventative measures such as improved communication between GPs, aka general practitioners, and police forces, firearms officers in the future could help stop a similar tragedy happening to another family." As for Chris's mom, she has forgiven Chris and still stands by him. Yeah. She literally said, "He took their lives away and I know that was wrong, but I think he did it because he loved them. You always love your children, whatever they do. You can't cut off because they've done something horrible. I know what he did was horrible, but it just wasn't Chris." Newsflash, it was Chris. Here's where I pass it to you. What do you think of this case? And what do you think Chris's ultimate motive was? Let me know in the comments section, and I'll see you next time on Killer Bites. Thanks for watching, everyone.